Thank you for your evidence today. For giving evidence today, would you like to make a short opening statement and then senators will ask you questions?
Of course. Well, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. My name is Will Shackel and I'm the founder of Nuclear for Australia, a non-partisan grassroots organisation with more than 115,000 supporters who are advocating for nuclear energy in Australia to support a clean energy grid. Information integrity in climate change and energy is critically important. Disinformation campaigns against all forms of clean energy should be condemned because Australia's transition must consider all of the available technologies, and that includes nuclear energy. Nuclear for Australia advocates for nuclear energy because it is affordable, reliable, emissions-free and safe. We make these arguments based on fact, science and fair representation and comparison, based on the Australian and international experience and guidance of establishing nuclear industries. The guiding principle of our organisation is a desire to improve the level of nuclear literacy in this country. Literacy when it comes to nuclear energy is critical because while the technology is widely established around the world, it is poorly understood in Australia. We acknowledge that there are people and groups with views different to ours, but it was concerning to see the deliberate misrepresentation of an industry that is well established and safely operating in 31 countries around the world. Mis and disinformation undermine the balanced debate our nation deserves as we seek to combat climate change and transition our energy grid away from carbon-intensive sources. Nuclear energy was a central point of the last election campaign because of the Liberal Party's energy platform. This led to Australians being targeted with a myriad of erroneous claims about nuclear safety, radioactive waste management, and the potential cost and value of a civil nuclear power program. This is in addition to regularly used and entirely fictional claims and risks, including reference to The Simpsons TV show's Three-Eyed Fish. Misinformation was shared in paid-for advertisements to the tune of around $3 million, according to our analysis of publicly available sources. This is not about whether you agree or disagree about nuclear energy. Everyone has a right to their own views on how a clean energy transition can and must be achieved, but astroturfing and deliberate misrepresentation and disinformation have no place in this debate. Relying upon misleading statements, unfair comparisons and assessments of an existing technology and outright ignorance of basic scientific principle for comedy does not advance community literacy and debate. The Australian public deserves better. In our submission, Nuclear for Australia makes 3 recommendations that the committee first supports nuclear literacy of clean energy technologies, including nuclear energy, 2, introduces requirements for truth in political advertising, and 3, recommends Australia rejoin the Gen 4 International Forum to ensure that Australian experts can be involved in knowledge sharing and have the best information available about future developments to help fill information gaps where disinformation can arise. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thanks, Will. So in the debate, I think most recently, the LNP, I think it may well have been Senator Hume, but I can stand corrected, when introducing a bill into the Senate around nuclear energy, said that we should be agnostic on technology sources. Although I would note it seems difficult to see some of the LNPs being agnostic on renewable energy. What are your views on renewable energy?
I support nuclear. I support all sources of clean
energy. I know you support nuclear.
Sorry, that is...
No, that's all good.
Of course, I wouldn't be before the committee if that wasn't the case, but I support all sources of clean energy, and that includes renewables like solar and wind.
Right, okay. So a number of submissions to the inquiry have described connections between Nuclear for Australia and the Mums for Nuclear campaign group, which spent significant amounts of money on advertising in the lead up to the May 2025 federal election. And they, this is your chance to respond to this. Submissions described the Mums for Nuclear campaign as a clear example to the committee on astroturfing. And that they also point out the fact that the contact email address on the Mums for Nuclear social media advertising campaign was linked to Nuclear for Australia. Can you confirm if Nuclear for Australia coordinated or was involved in the delivery of the Mums for Nuclear campaign?
Yes, and that was very obvious in whether it was the contact details, whether it was
Yep.
the advertisements that we ran, which were directed to Nuclear for Australia's website. This was a campaign that Nuclear for Australia was involved in funding and resourcing.
Yep.
But what's really clear is that these were mums who were involved in it, whether it was Lenka Kohler, Kirsty Braybon, Jasmine Diab. These are mums who were involved in Australia's nuclear industry, who wanted to support to be able to elevate their voices in the public debate, and that was a service that Nuclear for Australia provided to them, whether it was funding or the services we provided with campaigns, etc.
Okay, and are they still active?
Mums, we're not continuing that campaign at the moment, Mums for Nuclear.
So it was a campaign for the federal election then?
No, we were running that campaign for a short amount of time. We run many campaigns. This is constant, whether it's our fundraising campaigns, which lapse from time to time, but this was something which was conducted over a series of months at the start of the year.
So what are your views on the, I suppose, the evidence that that's an example of an astroturfing group that the committee should look at?
I completely disagree. An AstroTurf campaign, when you look at an organisation like Nuclear for Australia, we are funded by thousands of donors across the country, mums and dads. You can just go on our email list to have a look at our fundraising and how we go about our business.
Yep.
So I completely reject any accusation that Mums for Nuclear was a AstroTurf campaign. It certainly wasn't.
Yep.
You look at those three individuals who were leading that campaign, but then in addition to that, all of our supporters across the country, I completely reject any accusation that it was an AstroTurf campaign. And there's certainly lots of examples in the anti-nuclear space where you'd see AstroTurf campaigns being run.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll come back to that in a second. I'll be interested to hear what you think are examples of astroturfing. So you were saying that the donations from lots of supporters of nuclear energy around the country funded this group. Did they fund the Mums for Nuclear group directly, or did they fund it via your group?
No, it was a campaign that was funded by Nuclear for Australia, as with many of our campaigns that we run.
Okay. So do you think that was obvious to people who, because we've had obviously researchers look at this who wanted us to clarify this with you today because they didn't feel like it was obvious that, apart from that link?
I think it was very obvious. This is publicly available information via the Facebook ad library, which anyone can easily access. This is where we got our figures when assessing the impact and scale of the disinformation campaign against nuclear power, particularly in the lead up to the last election. You can see every single ad that we ran, and that is publicly available information which any researcher would be able to access.
Yeah, I suppose the question is was it clear that group was funded by Nuclear for Australia? I mean, yes, there was a link. There was a link to your page, but
I think it was very obvious. Myself personally, if the committee doesn't have that opinion, obviously I've clarified it here today. But what's really clear is Nuclear for Australia was funding that, and I think anyone who would have seen any of the ads we ran, particularly on Facebook, would have seen that it went straight through to Nuclear for Australia's website. I don't think there was any hiding that. Also, all of those mums who were leading that campaign were all involved in Nuclear for Australia's expert group. That is publicly available information. Kirsty Braybon's now a member of Nuclear for Australia's board. So I completely reject any of those accusations, and this is just publicly available information if people want to find out more about that campaign.
But can I just, sorry.
Sure,
but
go.
if the Mums for Nuclear are so passionate about this cause, then why was it wound down? I mean, it just seems a little bit more than a coincidence that this was spun up before the federal election at the start of the year, as you said, and then it was wound down. It looks suspiciously like an astroturfing campaign.
I don't agree with that at all. There's been continued efforts to try and get a Mothers for Nuclear group up in Australia, and from our perspective, it's just a question of our resources. We're a small organisation, and we have to commit different resources at different times. For example, right now, a lot of our focus is on establishing university clubs, so I really don't... we have campaigns that run from time to time. I wouldn't really be reading any more into that. Same with our fundraising campaigns. We run them pretty much every single month. That this is a question of our resourcing. Obviously, if we had the kind of money that some of the anti-nuclear groups did, then we would be running these campaigns in perpetuity. But unfortunately, those are not our circumstances in the pro-nuclear cause. And at that time, those mums wanted to do this, so we supported them to be able to run that campaign with the resources of Nuclear for Australia and our thousands of donors across the country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got certainly not questioning your passion for your cause and what you do, Will. But obviously there was a federal election on. The LNP were clearly campaigning on nuclear energy as one of their clear campaigns. So I suppose my question then goes to your recommendation, which you mentioned, around the need for disclosure around third-party advertising laws, or as you say, legislate truth in political advertising laws. The AEC defines electoral expenditure very narrowly as expenses with the dominant purposes of creating and communicating electoral matters to influence the way electors vote in a federal election. So I agree with you personally about the need for these laws. Do you feel like that this group fell under those laws given there was an election on nuclear energy?
No, we do continued advocacy and raising public education through our campaigns. We do not consider anything that we did to be an electoral matter. We never endorsed the coalition's policy. We never told anyone how to vote. We were simply, and we continue to do this to this day, nothing really changed for us, is the fact that we wanted to raise nuclear literacy and combat the huge amount of disinformation we see in the nuclear debate, such as that figure I cited, over $3 million being spent on quite explicitly disinformation against nuclear power recently.
Okay, so, sorry
just on the topic of misinformation, Peter Dutton during the campaign walked around telling anyone who would listen, platforming on a national stage, that the amount of waste from nuclear plants would fit into a Coke can. He went around the country saying that, everyone heard it, but I never once heard Nuclear for Australia or yourself stand up and refute that, because that's actually not right, and you've got the data on your website.
Well,
why did you not? I mean, given the fact that you are passionate about ensuring people seek the truth out there regarding nuclear energy and its waste, why did you not use your platform and your own voice during the campaign to refute that information that Peter Dutton was propagating? Well,
it's a well-known fact that the amount of fuel needed to power someone completely over their lifetime with nuclear power is the size of a Coke can.
But that's not what Peter Dutton said, Will.
But I only believe that he said that on one occasion. Now, you obviously have to go through my social media records. I would have hoped that I would have responded to that. I can tell you that that initial claim that I believe he made at a press conference at the start of the year, where he seemed to incorrectly imply that it was the amount of waste that a whole small modular reactor would create, was not correct. That is something that I'm currently telling the committee, and I hope I would have corrected in the moment as well. But in that campaign, there was so many politicians.
Did you notice when he did say that? Did it seem that was incorrect information to you when he did say that?
At that time, we were getting statements of disinformation pretty much every single day, every single hour, which we were having to respond to.
Did anyone, sorry to interrupt, but did anyone from the Liberal Party, with your indulgence, Chair, advise you against correcting Peter Dutton's record?
No,
publicly?
I'm not sure who you'd be implying would have that connection.
No, that's
to me
fine.
To be
I'm
able
just
to
asking
do
the
that.
question. But thank you.
Frankly, there was elements of disinformation which were much more concern during the campaign, particularly around waste. That was, I hope that Peter Dutton was not deliberately misrepresenting that quite well-known fact, that he might have seen it through Nuclear for Australia's resources and our fact sheets and misstated it. There was a couple of times I recall the opposition leader doing that. Obviously, that's really disappointing to see a politician who, is not sharing the correct facts on nuclear power, and that's something that we certainly work to do across Parliament, is to ensure that politicians have access to the facts. But I think what was even disappointing this morning in the committee was hearing the discussion from some committee members around the existence of nuclear waste solutions in Australia. There was, I believe, a suggestion that there wasn't any existing solutions for radioactive waste management in Australia, which was not true. There is a private facility at Telus and Sandy Ridge, and also ANSTO has facilities. So I think that even to this day, we see examples of disinformation which go much further. But certainly, I'm making the record very clear in this committee. If a committee member wants to put an example of a politician saying something incorrect about nuclear power, like that example from Peter Dutton, then I'll correct it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So sorry, how much, you're saying it's all publicly available, but how much did you spend, or how much did Mums for Nuclear spend of your money?
Look, you'd have to look at the public records of that. Okay. That's available.
Could you take that on notice?
Library?
Could you take that on notice for us? Great. Was there any AEC interest in Mums for Nuclear? Did they stage any kind of intervention in relation to what they were spending?
We received a single so there was 2 emails during the course of the election we received from the AEC. Both were basically general advice, which went no further. It was around basically...
Authorisations?
Yes, it was around authorisations and where they'd be needed for an electoral matter. I responded very quickly by describing what I've now described to the committee as well, that we did not believe anything we were doing was an electoral matter. It was public education around nuclear power. We were not telling anyone how to vote. We made that clear to the AEC and we didn't get a response after that. It was generic information. It looked a lot like they just plugged our name into a generic form that we were sent. And there was a second example, I believe, related more broadly to Nuclear for Australia. During our national nuclear tour at the start of the year, we were giving out core flutes to supporters, which is now a broader merchandise operation that we now have since the election. And I believe a supporter put that in an A-frame and put it at a polling booth. That was not something that we were aware of, and when it came to our attention, the AEC let us know. It obviously didn't have an authorisation on it, and we swiftly responded to that and got no further correspondence from the AEC.
So just so I can understand it then. So you've been campaigning on nuclear for a while. You're kind of the face of it, to be honest. But did you then just see the federal election as an opportunity to spend some money to raise education and awareness on nuclear energy because it was kind of in the papers, because the LNP were campaigning on it? Like, what was the purpose or the intent, I suppose, behind the step up in expenditure around an election?
Well, we're continuing to grow. Even since the election, we've raised a lot of money from our supporters across the country. So yeah. I don't, at the end of the day, it's our ability to make an impact and to campaign is limited to the access of donations that we have. We don't receive the large funds from, philanthropies and corporations like some of the anti-nuclear groups do in Australia. So at the end of the day, it was a trajectory of growth that Nuclear for Australia was achieving. I set this up, I think it's now 3 years ago, well before the coalition ever became involved with nuclear power. And I think the last thing I'd also bring to committee's attention is during the election campaign, we were very active because there was a lot of disinformation against nuclear power, which had a political motive. Now, we're not there to combat the political motive. We weren't there to, correct the record when necessarily the coalition's policy was being attacked. That was their job, and frankly, you could argue that they didn't do a very good job of it. Our job in the debate was when we were seeing broader examples of disinformation, making sure they were combated. And you can see in our submission, there's a lot of examples of that.
Okay. Well, just my last question before I go to the Deputy Chair. In terms of funding, is your opportunity to talk about your funding? So you're saying you've taken no money from corporations?
We've received corporate donations, but they're very minimal and largely relate to the tour we had at the start of the year. To emphasise, we have not received funding from the nuclear power industry.
So the tour at the start of the year, you're talking about the former Miss America, what's her, Grace Sharkey? Grace Sharkey?
Grace Stanky.
Grace Shanky, okay.
Now by a different last name, she's married now.
Okay. So on that point, why would they be donating at that time? Was that to pay for her trip to Australia?
Correct. And the events that we held, which obviously had huge expenses associated with them, whether it was the venues and other things, I was working quite hard to fundraise for that tour because we thought it was going to be a really big impact. We'd been working for quite a long time to try and bring Grace over to Australia.
So you were behind bringing her over then, is that correct?
Yes,
yeah.
and that
Okay.
I don't think there would be any contention of.
No, I just
that
wasn't.
was
I just
publicly
wasn't aware
advertised.
Of that.
That it was
Yeah.
us.
Excuse me, Chair, who was that you brought over?
Grace Stanky, nuclear engineer at Constellation, former Miss America. She's one of the leading nuclear advocates in the United States.
Thank you.
And can you tell me which corporations donated to you for her trip?
I don't think that would be appropriate because there's obviously, we've got a donation policy. I can't tell if there's confidentiality arrangements around that, and that would be the same for any third-party organisation like ours. So that's not information
Do you support changing the rules to make third parties declare their sources of donations?
I think it's a difficult question because you see certainly in the nuclear debate what advocates like myself, people who put their names to nuclear power, nuclear science and technology are confronted with, the threats and abuse that we receive. Frankly, I know that there would be a lot of donors who would be really uncomfortable having their name to something as controversial like nuclear power, and that's really got a lot to do with the toxic debate which is in place in Australia. So I think that's a complicated question. I don't have issues around transparency. We're an ACNC registered organisation. We have mandatory reporting requirements, but I think that's a complex question.
Look, it is a complex question. I agree, and I think all sides of the debate have sensitivities around individuals donating, but I would have thought corporations, for example, if they were coal companies or...
We haven't received any funding from the fossil fuel industry.
You'll rule that out. Okay, great.
I ruled that out.
Just last thing, did you receive any money from the Cormac Foundation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, could you take that on notice?
I can take that on notice. I do not believe that. I know there was media reports around.
That's why
I assume that's
yeah.
advance and stuff. I think I don't need to take that on notice. We did not receive funding from that organisation.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Will. We know that you briefed the Liberals and the Nationals on, I think, around the 5th of November. Around the discussions of about their energy policy. What did you cover in that presentation? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I think the important thing, first of all, we weren't there necessarily just to brief the coalition. We put invitations out to Labor, independents and politicians across Parliament to be able to engage. Unfortunately, we didn't receive any accepted meeting requests, which we found really disappointing, and we were walking the halls, just sharing general recommendations, which I'd be happy to share with yourself and the Labor Party as well.
So you had there was an open invitation to all the MPs, is that what you're saying? And then...
We sent private invitations out to multiple Labor MPs, independents, the coalition. We certainly weren't able to reach the whole coalition. It's obviously important that when you've got a party like the Coalition, which is in a very interesting debate at the moment on energy and climate, that they were engaged. But also, I think I've been on the record previously, it's really important that we have bipartisanship in the energy debate. The UK Labor Party supports nuclear power. They recently came out with their announcements around Sizewell C and the Rolls-Royce SMRs with Keir Starmer. At the same time, the
Sorry, can I just draw you back to the meeting? So just to be clear, so you put out this was a private meeting, it was in camera, it was not a public meeting, is that right?
Yeah, there were committee meetings, and this has been publicly reported as well.
It has, yeah. I just want to get clarification
apparel,
around the details. So were there who were the other experts in the room? Was it just yourself, or were there other people there?
It was certainly not just myself, like the media reports indicated. As you could see via our social media and also via communications with our supporters and donors across the country who funded this visit. We were joined on Monday by Lenka Kohler, who's a nuclear engineer, Kirsty Braybon, a nuclear lawyer, Dr. Robert Barr, AM, who's an electrical engineer, and Jasmine Diab, another nuclear engineer. Jazz and Lenka didn't stay for Tuesday, Wednesday, but we found it really disappointing that we had brought nuclear experts to Canberra, our supporters had backed it, and we didn't get that engagement from, particularly the Labor Party. I found that really disappointing, particularly when I note the international precedent for, progressive Labor parties to support nuclear power because of the jobs benefits and benefits with decarbonisation.
Well, I won't go into our energy policy in this forum, but it's out there for the world to see, and it was elected on at the last election, resoundingly endorsed by the Australian people. But we'll leave that for now. What do you hope will be the outcomes from the deliberations today in the coalition as they debate? You call it a debate. I would call it a civil war within the coalition around energy policy, and it's been raging for about 15, 20 years.
Debate that's
but it may come to a resolution. I don't know. We'll see. What do you hope will be the outcome of those deliberations?
Well, look, our interest with Nuclear for Australia is that we see nuclear power stay on the coalition's agenda. I think that's the biggest takeaway that we want. At the end of the day, net zero will only be possible with nuclear power. But even in a different scenario, say for whatever reason, if they were not to pursue net zero, it's still needed because of Australia's rising electricity demands, the needs of industry. So regardless of their decision on, I guess, that broader goal, what's really important is that nuclear power is central to their considerations.
And do you support taxpayers funding nuclear reactors in Australia?
Oh, look, we think that all financing options should be explored, including private-public partnerships around the world. There's precedent for that, for example, in the US, where they have their US Department of Energy Loans Office, which provides a public finance. I think that it'd be hard-pressed to find too many experts who would agree with the complete public financing approach. And like I said at the start of the committee, we didn't endorse the coalition's nuclear policy. We're a non-partisan organisation. That is in our constitution. But the important thing to say is, contrary to a lot of the media debate, private industry around the world does back nuclear power. Indeed, last year, 14 of the world's biggest banks and funds, including Morgan Stanley, Barclays and others, committed to supporting the Triple Nuclear Power Pledge, which was announced originally at COP28 in Dubai. So there's a lot of interest. Also, the World Bank has recently lifted their opposition to nuclear power. So Australia's really falling behind as we have this discussion today.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before I go to Senator Canavan, Will, could I just ask, whether it was the Mums for Nuclear campaign or bringing, I just got to make sure I get the name right, Grace Stanky to Australia. Have you used like public relations firms or communications firms?
We have.
You have? Could you tell us who they were?
I don't think that would be appropriate for me to detail our arrangements with professional advisors. Would be the same for any third-party organisation. There's certain confidentiality arrangements which go both ways in those relationships. Same that you wouldn't expect to see that information from political parties or other groups that would have appeared over the last few days.
I'll contemplate that answer, and I'll now go to Senator Canavan.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry I missed the start of your contribution, Mr. Shackel, and sorry if I repeat others' questions, but just wanted to clarify, how old are you?
19.
And how old were you when you established Nuclear for Australia?
16.
Well, I do want to commend you as a marvellous young Australian, obviously extremely articulate at such a young age, and being incredibly successful. How many members do you have?
115,000
wow,
people on our
19 years old. Well, look, again, just I put on the record, it'd be great to have more young Australians like you on all different political issues, on all different sides of the issue. Whatever people's thoughts on it are, I think you've done a marvellous job. I did want to ask though. You did hint at it before. Being so young, it sounds to me like you have found yourself under quite a lot of attack. Could you just describe some of that to our committee?
Yeah, I think it's been really disappointing for me. I've had abuse, death threats that I've had to get sorted out, particularly after some of my media activity, and that's really disappointing that, a young person in this space. A lot of politicians in Canberra go on about supporting young people and elevating their views, but the moment which you sort of sway from, I guess, the traditional way of doing things, and certainly nuclear is one of those issues, you really have copped it. And there's examples which I don't think it would be hard to find, looking up my name around my people's criticisms of my personal experience, all the rest of it. I've had journalists who've come after myself and my family. Even, I guess, the Australian Conservation Foundation is a good example of an organisation, professional organisation with significant funding, which has come after me. This is an example from their quiz that they cited earlier today. If you're not sure who that is, that's meant to be myself. And simply, this is their whole disinformation quiz around nuclear power, which ironically had a cover photo of an AI-generated image of a nuclear waste barrel, which is slightly ironic. But you have a look at this tweet, which they claim is disinformation. All I was saying is that all energy sources, including nuclear power, have life cycle emissions associated with it, and they decide to do this quiz sent out to their, I think, up to 500,000 supporters, and I'm sure the committee can make their own descriptions of what that looks like, but it doesn't look very much like me. So,
Can you table that? You'll be able to table that for the committee?
Oh, of course.
Can you tell us
We
what
can
it
hand
said?
that over.
I said on Twitter, ACF say renewables are zero emissions, but nuclear isn't. They ignore the life cycle emissions of solar and wind, but then get angry when people apply their own standards for nuclear energy. Now, not
Just to be clear, that's a caricature of you. Or
that's a
meant to be
caricature of me, and there's
yourself.
multiple examples of this. There was another where
That's not a real fight or anything like that.
That's-
They've doctored that.
I think
there's great license under our laws for political satire, and as there should be. But how old were you when they did that?
this was at the end of last year, but it was
You were
basically
18 or
that.
so, 18.
Yeah, that was their whole quiz. There was examples again where they were calling me a conspiracy theorist, where I believe I was flying a UFO and sucking up aliens. It was all
What's wrong
based
with
on. Well, I'd argue I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
UFOs I'm talking about.
Oh, look, well,
You said that's a conspiracy theory.
I do, and I'd hope members of the committee agree. But there's a lot of examples like this. I think what I found most disappointing is obviously I'm very aware, being active on social media and stuff, that I'll get pushback from members of the public and whatever, but when it gets really personal like that, and when it's large organisations, which we should frankly expect better of, and there's a lot more examples I can provide. Get up, going through all of my LinkedIn connections to, come up with these conspiracy theories that I was a plant of the coal industry. I've had suggestions, and Senator Canavan, apologies if this. Apologies for this, but I've had suggestions on Twitter that I'm one of your children, and last time I checked, Senator, you're not my dad. So, I've been the target of, I guess, disinformation myself, and I think it's really disappointing that I'm not the only one who's got this experience. There's a lot of people, especially young people in the climate and energy space, which are targets of disinformation towards themselves, and I think that's not very conducive to healthy debate on these important matters.
Can I ask you to expand a bit on, you mentioned the media going after yourself and your family. What did that constitute?
Yeah, so mainly, I guess, fringe outlets such as Crikey, the so-called Independent Australia, Renew Economy. I know my dad's work was getting contacted.
By those organisations?
Yes, Renew Economy specifically. And in my case, you can obviously, there's public records of descriptions of me, I would argue quite condescending and at times pretty abusive from Crikey and other outlets, which I found really disappointing. I've pushed back on them. They were sending really unreasonable media requests during my exam time, which I communicated to them. There's an example with the Crikey article where I think they, to have a bit of a shot at me, included a bit of that explanation that I was in exams when they were sending me these frequent media requests. So
they actually publicly reported that you were in exams.
Yeah, they included my comment, I think, as a...
So just run through this. So you told them, look, I might be hard to get back to you because I'm in exams, and they reported that?
Yes. I wasn't too... look, I don't think that's...
Was that an official response to them, though?
That was my comment. Yeah. It's publicly available in the articles.
Students at exam. I mean, what public interest is there in that? I mean, it's...
Will responded. So.
I get it, Chair, but look, people out there listening can make their own judgments, but I mean, some of the standards in our media are shocking. To do that to a young person, their exams publicly report it, and clearly with an agenda, an axe to grind here. What about your family? Just drill down on that. So why were they contacting your dad's office? Renew Economy, was it? Renew Economy were contacting your dad's office? What was the rationale for that? Did they give?
Oh, I think it was around, his work, and he does some work around, renewables and stuff. So I think, obviously they're just trying to point a hole and, trying to claim that there were some family divisions, which is obviously not the case. There are many people in the renewable industry who have, concerns around our system and understand the need for nuclear power in the mix. But I thought that was, completely inappropriate. But there's been examples, of course, on social media as well of people going after my family, which I find, really
I suppose what's most concerning is some people here, apparently in the Senate, even don't think that's inappropriate. I mean, I think it's inappropriate to go after a young person's family who's just trying to involve themselves in public debate. You've always done so very articulately, as I've said, and reasonably. But it is absolutely, in my view at least, I'll put on the record, completely inappropriate to try and drag family members in when someone's just trying to have civil debate and involve themselves in the political process. Obviously, you're a very resilient young person, Mr. Shackel, to continue doing what you do, and I commend you for that. Have you seen, though, these type of tactics deter other young people from being involved?
Oh, certainly. Good examples, Greta Thunberg and the attacks that she's faced. And, I understand people might disagree with her, but I think there's I think there's a trend.
Are you a fan of Greta, Will?
I admire the fact that she took a stand and took initiative. I think that's really admirable.
Yeah.
I just think more broadly in the energy and climate space that we should be encouraging young people to, take a stand on these issues. And it seems to be a bit of a theme, particularly when I guess you have a bit of a dissenting point of view. And I think this goes for engagement with young people more broadly as well. It's great to elevate a young person when they agree with your beliefs, but when they don't, they should be equally elevated and provided with that support. And I certainly haven't really experienced that, unfortunately.
Is there? Have you seen any coordination of the attacks to you, or is it just random?
Oh, I guess that I'd be going. I don't think it'd be reasonable for me to, speculate around whether there is some coordination. It's certainly come from all angles, but I don't think that's reasonable for me to be making those assumptions.
And I just wanted to finally ask, you said you had offered to brief other political parties, Labor and Greens MPs. Does that offer stand? Would you?
Oh, of course.
Would you happily brief other politicians?
Myself, but more particularly because I'm not a nuclear expert, members of Nuclear for Australia's expert group would be thrilled to be able to provide advice to Labor, Independents, Greens, other parties, and we actively try to do that. We've engaged previously with the Parliamentary Friends of Nuclear Industries, where we were glad to see some broad support. We think it's really important that there's bipartisanship on this because, like I said, there's precedent for it in the US and the UK. Even the Finnish Greens support nuclear power. It boggles my mind how some of these political parties can oppose it, particularly Labor Party. I think you look at the UK and the support from the unions in the UK, which makes sense because nuclear has the highest jobs intensity of any energy source. It really confuses me why we don't see some more support from those parties, and hopefully we'll see that in the future, and I'm certainly committed to helping us get there.
Well, thank you again for all you do, and once again, congratulations on what you've achieved.
Go to Senator Darmanin for some questions.
So I've just got a couple of quick ones. It's just about the funding of the organisation, and I note that before you talked about I can't remember the words you used exactly, they were remarkably similar to the IPA in terms of the confidentiality of your donors and things like that. I'm not sure if you were listening in there, but or familiar with the processes around answering questions to these sorts of inquiries. But with that in mind, you also mentioned the briefing in Canberra recently and the reporting around that, and your disappointment about the backers that had obviously supported that event to occur. Who were they?
This was, so I'm not sure familiar with the system Nation Builder, which is where our website is based. That was completely Nation Builder donations. So I guess for people who aren't familiar with that system, that's, grassroots
right.
donations.
So you're talking about So they were all through Nation Builder?
That was completely
All
through Nation Builder.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to provide a list of who the donors of Nuclear for Australia are?
I don't think that's appropriate with our donation policy. There's many thousands of donors, and we haven't asked for their permission to provide that information. So obviously I can seek counsel on that and seek advice, but
that would
just
be,
from the top of my mind,
I'd appreciate that if you could, just in terms of, and you know, we're talking about, like, I appreciate what you're saying in terms of Nation Builder and online, you know, average people. I think in terms of the kind of concerns that I think lots of people from different perspectives have raised about where misinformation comes from, I think people are really keen to understand and have transparency around who is backing the various views and organisations that are out there. And so it's kind of with that in mind that we're thinking about large organisations, corporate donors and sponsors and people like that, as opposed to kind of the individuals who are campaigning for whichever kind of view they hold. So that's the sort of information that, you know, I'm certainly interested in, not just from your organisation, but from many others that we've also been asking questions of. So, you know, if you can take that on notice in terms of the obligations around asking questions, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah,
Will, just to follow up Senator Darminen's question, if you're reluctant to provide names, I understand that, but even a split of who businesses are versus individuals would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Just before I go to Senator Roberts, I did consider your response to my question about whether you'd engaged, you know, professional services of PR firms or communication firms. So maybe I'll put it to you in a different way. Have you engaged the professional services from Tofin Guerin or Whitestone Strategic?
No.
You're happy to rule that out?
I'm very happy to rule that out.
That's what I thought might happen. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for appearing. I must say I also need to comment on your vigour and your input into the debate in Australia. Our democracy, unfortunately, has slipped into a very passive democracy, and passive democracy slips into apathy, which is where we're at, I think. Very active democracy is essential for restoring our country, so that means engagement from citizens. Thank you for showing the adults how to do it. Well, you're actually an adult now anyway, so thank you.
Young
You
adult.
started when you were 16. I agree about your comments about the nuclear misinformation and disinformation. I'll just give you a tip. What someone says about you tells us about them, not about you. When labels are the refuge of the ignorant, the incompetent, the dishonest, the fearful, and the timid, and the plain old ignorant. So keep going, please. Going to your table on funding, on about your third or fourth page, I notice the Australian Labor Party tops out at more than a third. How did you get that data? I think you may have explained that to Senator Whish-Wilson, but if you don't mind, could you just go over it again? How did you compile it? I know you said it's not 100% perfect, but
Yeah.
it's good.
That's a Facebook ad library, and then also the other resource you can use is the Google ad library. Now, in the example of the Labor Party, there were many thousands of ads which were run in the election, so there was an overall estimate, but we couldn't manually go through all of those ads and identify which ones were around nuclear power and which ones, I guess, would contain some of those elements of disinformation, like the $600 billion figure, 3.7%, and other claims that were made. So it's using that publicly available information.
When you add the top line, which is the Labor Party by a long, long way, way more than double the next, number two, then you add them to the other, for example, Electrical Trades Union, Queensland Labor Party, what does that give you? How big an influence was Labor in the misinformation and disinformation campaign?
Just to clarify, Senator, we're talking about all of the examples of organisations I listed, or only specifically the
ones that you think may be connected with the Labor Party?
Look, I'd probably just refer to... I think that would be difficult to do. Obviously, in our submission, we identified at least over $3 million being spent by what we perceived as the largest anti-nuclear groups in Australia, those listed there, and those calculations are all provided for those groups. I can't speculate on what political connections they may or may not have.
So and there's probably more misinformation, disinformation than just this.
Oh, certainly. Even with I believe the Australian Labor Party spent an overall of $9 million on Google ads, at least. Now, I couldn't obviously discern which ones of those contain some of those claims, like 600 billion, 3.7% from the Smart Energy Council, but it was a high percentage of those. And then you obviously have to add in the TV ads, radio ads, digital on-demand ads, which aren't factored into this. This is purely social media, and on social media alone, of these figures I've been able to calculate, Nuclear for Australia estimates that at least over $3 million was spent.
When I add your number one line item, which is the Labor Party, to the Electrical Trades Union, I get over 50% of the total. So what I'm saying is the government or the government-connected outfits spend a hell of a lot of money against you.
There's certainly a lot of organisations which spent a lot of money in the campaign. That's an accurate thing to say.
I'll just clarify, Will. I mean, yes, you're promoting nuclear energy. Were those ads more generally related to Peter Dutton's policies?
Well, no, because if you look at the Australian Labor Party advertisements, which reference the $600 billion figure, 3.7% of the grid, the Smart Energy Council, I believe, published that before the final modelling was available from the coalition. So I see that as being more broad. And a lot of these claims were just universally around nuclear power. Now, obviously, with the $600 billion figure, the coalition could obviously dispute that that was not the figure they had in their Frontier report, but that was not what we're specifically contesting. What we were contesting was the fact that, say, the $600 billion figure was based on doubling the cost of the most expensive nuclear power project ever and extrapolating it out, over 5 times more expensive than the Gen Cost report's estimates for the capital cost of a nuclear power project. Now, I see that as blatant disinformation. And then the second big example we saw was this claim that nuclear would only be 3.7% of the grid. Now, that was really basic error. I wouldn't even call it error, because I think that surely someone at the Smart Energy Council would have worked this out. It completely ignored the difference between capacity and generation, wherein a nuclear power plant can produce around 3 times more energy than an equivalent capacity solar or wind farm. So those are blatant examples which I think go more broader.
We can put that to the Smart Energy Council
and get
a response from them. Yeah. So last question, Senator Rob.
So, Mr. Shackel, was there any coordination that you could see between the Labor campaign against nuclear and Labor affiliates like the ETU?
Perhaps there's a lot of similar talking points, but I wasn't on the inside of those campaigns to be able to assess that. But I think it's something worth the committee doing a bit more research into.
And there's the other groups like Climate 200, which is notorious for misinformation and disinformation, supporting the government's position, and trying to knock out nuclear because they're making some of their large donors are making subsidies from solar and wind.
In the example of Climate 200, they were running a campaign around nuclear power causing a carbon bomb, and from our perspective, the imagery that was used and other things that insinuated that nuclear power was not emissions-free and would cause harm to the climate was, incorrect. You'd obviously have to ask representatives of Climate 200. I'm not going to speculate on the reasoning for that.
So this question is meant in a nice way. What happened to your second head?
Oh, well, I don't know where my second head or third eye is. I've been to many nuclear power plants, but I haven't.
I think that's a very offensive question to Tasmanians, Senator. I ask that you withdraw it. Listen, we've got to wrap up. But I do have one last question for you, Will. Is your motivation for nuclear energy because you're a climate activist, because you want to see lower emissions? And
well, I think there's a lot of reasons why we need nuclear power. One of the biggest is obviously my concern about climate change and lowering emissions, and nuclear around the world is one of the best ways of doing that. It's prevented an additional 2 years of global emissions, saved around 1.84 million lives according to NASA, is the lowest emissions energy source according to the UN. But in addition to that, there's a huge other issues why I support it, ranging from electricity bills, the impact for communities with jobs and industry. I think there's a lot of reasons why it should be considered.
So did you feel conflicted? I understand you presented at an event with Campbell Newman in Queensland at the Australian Institute of Progress, which is a coal-funded member of the Atlas Network. Were you aware of that? Did you feel conflicted?
I wasn't aware of that specific connection. I speak at many events. I don't have the time or resources to look into them, but I was not aware of that connection, to make that crystal clear.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you for your evidence
Thank
today. Any questions that the senators will give you on notice, the committee will get back to you on that.
Thank you for having me.